Welcome to the Global Experience Leaders series, where we talk to the leaders behind the multilingual digital future, how they lead, innovate, and grow their careers. I'm Spence Green, CEO of Lilt, and this week we're joined by Nicole Broe of Snap. She's a pioneer of localization at some of the largest entertainment companies in the world, including Netflix, Blizzard, and Riot Games. Throughout her career, she's defined the strategy that has led to the growth and success of localization. Okay, I'm joined by my friend Nicole Broe, who leads localization at Snap, which is a really awesome company. And before that, she worked in localization at Netflix, Blizzard, and Riot. So she's kind of like LA, Hollywood, for sure. And I understand before all of this, Nicole, you studied film in college. So did you want to be an actor?
Yes, embarrassingly so.
Okay.
It did. And I actually moved to Hollywood to pursue that dream. And when I got here, it was because I was in the middle of the writer's strike. And so there were no jobs. There were no acting jobs. And so I thought, well, why don't I find something a little more stable that offers health insurance? And I went behind the camera and ended up working at Paramount Pictures. And that's where I got into localization in the mastering organization, which is the replication of film and television pieces and trailers.
And was that localization like transcription or subtitling or like the sort of content that goes around films?
Yeah, I was subtitling and dubbing. So working inside of the master organization to replicate their content into all those different languages.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think this is, I like to ask people just to start with, localization is kind of a niche field. And I think localization is sort of like a referee in a athletic contest. If we're doing our job right, then, like the game just kind of goes along and everything kind of works. So that means also you sort of found out about it serendipitously. And I wonder if, you said you're exposed to it at Paramount. Did you have any other background in languages or, speaking languages at home or travel that sort of compelled you to take an interest in this field?
No, my French is bad and my Spanish is worse. I took a French class all through high school and had the most amazing French teacher, and she very much inspired everyone that was in her classes to travel the world. She took all the classes above us, stopped at ours, to France, for a week, and really gave a lot of kids who lived in upstate New York, very homogenous population, very singular, not a lot of diversity, gave us a peek into what the rest of the world was. I'm forever grateful to her for that. And it's probably the reason that working inside of the international market space resonated with me, was because of the curiosity she sparked in terms of travel. And then I realized that I would meet all these beautiful, wonderful people from around the world if I was part of this industry. And that was also really attractive to me. So that's how I ended up in it.
Now, but between Paramount and your first localization gig, you had a interlude in your journey where you started a company. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was playing kickball for social reasons in Los Angeles, and I didn't like the way the kickball organization was being run, so we started our own. And I ran that for a couple of seasons. I ran it like a democratic institution where kickball team managers have votes, and then decided after a while that it was time to move on and do other things. But yes, it was called Collective 360. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was a really good time. And I think at some point I examined my life, and I was like planning these external activities for this 200-person friend group and renting like 5 school buses. I was like, what am I doing? I can't do this anymore. So it was good for my 20s, I'll say.
Well, I think, I mean, that's kind of a formative leadership experience in terms of being responsible for, sort of a large group. And I wonder if that, kind of as you go along, having an early sort of entrepreneurial or leadership experience like that, have you drawn on that, or has that been useful to you later in life?
I don't think it started there. I think it started much younger. I mean, if I was on the playground, I was always in charge.
From knowing you, I can see that.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think I learned a lot there about making sure that voices were heard and the type of leader I wanted to be. Probably when I was a younger leader, I was much more directive, uh, like, kindergarten. And then inside of that role, I became much more of a service-based
Hmm.
leader. Like I wanted to make sure that people felt like they had what they wanted and felt appreciated and felt like they were part of it. And I carry that with me. I've carried that with me everywhere I've gone since then. So
Well, let's talk about the first. So the first place you went when you moved into localization was Riot, and games game localization is idiosyncratic in that there's a big storytelling component of it, and thus you typically have a pretty large QA team sort of getting things right in the local markets. So I wonder, being exposed to, your first job being, or besides Paramount, but your first like production localization job being exposed to like the more extreme end of localization production. Tell us a little bit about that and, what you learned from that really specific way of doing localization.
yeah, I got really lucky at Riot. There's a wonderful man. His name is FX, and he was my mentor in this space and brought me into like what software localization looks like. And he was
Mm-hmm.
so kind in teaching me. Forever grateful to him. But I think what I learned there was first thing, I was very lucky that I didn't have to put it in a box
Mm-hmm.
because if you have to ship it in a box, you only get one shot, right? Video games as they're delivered now, it's much more iterative, so you can actually act on like customer feedback, player feedback, and sometimes you can ship a little faster knowing that you can fix it later if there's an egregious issue. So I did love that. But there was a lot of attention to quality, as you mentioned. We had a large quality team there working in many different languages. Um, and the most important thing for delivering excellent quality in any product, and this is really specific to not really specific to games, but important in games, is you got to get upstream with your quality. A lot of folks think quality just comes at the end, and you
Up
can't do
to
it that
up
way.
to
It's
the
too late.
content authorship.
Yeah, it's too late
Yeah.
by the time you get, by the time you get to the back half of the process and just do it at the end, right? That's when quality happens, that's when localization happens. Actually, that's when bad quality happens and bad
Right.
localization happens, right?
Right.
So, getting folks at a game company like playing early, right? Or in their other languages with maybe machine translation, let's just see what it looks like. Or perhaps just doing an internationalization review or a cultural view on the product and how it's being built. If you're building a character that has features a lot of skulls and bones, that's not going to play in certain countries, right? And
Right.
and so
Right.
you want to get ahead of something like that. And there's a lot more, like when you're just building like an app that's just text, it's not as it's not as difficult to navigate because there's not as many components in terms of like imagery and videos and playing off cultural memes and things like that. So getting upstream for quality is extremely important. And we did a lot of that at Riot, and we're actually doing a lot of that at Snap now too.
Well, let's talk about that because I think one of the least discussed, in my view, but perhaps most critical parts of localization is sort of stakeholder management upstream.
Mm,
If you're just sort of catching stuff at the end of the pipeline, you restrict what you can actually do,
mm,
and you offer yourself a lot more flexibility, but that requires more, sort of business skills
mm-hmm.
and stakeholder management if you're going to go really engage business units and try to influence the way that they work. So maybe tell us a little bit about that and your approach to that.
Yeah, typically when I take over a new team or walk into a new organization, they're at that phase where the folks inside are amazing localization industry project managers executing and delivering on translation activities and sometimes even quality passes. But that next evolution of that step is really climbing upstream, and that's what my team has gone through and is going through. And it's a different skill set than checking all the boxes and completing a task. So leaders like myself have to do this, or have to do, are lucky enough to be able to take on these teams that are about to grow, right, into new, take their careers to new heights. And one of those things, like you mentioned, is stakeholder management. And so sometimes I have to get out ahead of the team and make sure that the organization doesn't call things like quality and localization, those two functions of the company, a service.
Oh,
If they are a
interesting.
service, yeah, if you call them a service, you're dead in the water, right? Like you have no power to say, hey, you can't build this character this way, or this lens doesn't work for X, Y, and Z markets. It's just no, we give you the work and then you just translate it. You have to frame your organization as a partnership. So no, we're partners in helping you deliver to a global audience. And if you don't partner with us, then you're going to limit your scope in terms of who you can hit when you're pushing this product out to the world. So we spend a lot of time there in that space. Usually that's where I do most of my work, is making sure we're positioned properly in the organization to be able to have that voice. And then
Mhm.
what I work with on my folks that work for me is how to tactically deliver that mission
Mhm.
inside of different product teams.
And is that a way, typically, I think leaders that spend more time inside the business engaging stakeholders, that's kind of also how you bring recognition to localization generally, but to yourself as well as a
Mhm.
business partner. Have you found that to be true, or not so much?
Yes, I have found that to be true. Um, So I'll tell you, you end up having to bat away a lot of opportunities, right? Because we always say this in localization. For the folks that have been at a company for a long time, we always say they always know where the bodies are buried. They know everything that's broken. And that's because they work with every single team on every single product, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes we have lots of people come to us asking for our partnership in creating new initiatives, for example, or we have to work upstream with all product teams on their products, or we end up finding problems that are cross-functional that no one else is going to identify because
Right,
no one else is working as cross-functionally as we are. Say, for
right,
example, we're like, okay, why don't we have I don't know, a certain tool, or we have five of the same type of tool. We should consolidate and have one tool. So
right.
we end up being these, we end up, I end up working, I hardly do any localization work, to be honest with you, at this point. I just work outside of the framework of
Hmm.
localization to make sure that the people that work inside of my sphere and inside of my discipline have what they need and are unencumbered when working with folks outside of our discipline. So
Yeah, localization is maybe one of the only functions in the company that just all of the information kind of flows through. I mean, you see marketing, you see product, you see sales, support, like all of it kind of goes through,
yeah,
which is
our two
uh,
our two partners we lock arms with are the release team and the functional QA team.
right,
Those are our
exactly,
buddies. So
right.
yeah.
Um, well, before we get to Snap, I know you also spent some time at Netflix, and Netflix is an extraordinary company in a lot of different ways, but their localization program in particular is extraordinary in both its size and scope, um, and its predisposition for building its own tools.
Mhm.
But I think what's really interesting that maybe a lot of people, especially in the United States, don't know is that Netflix's international growth rate has exceeded its domestic growth rate for years now at this point.
Yeah.
And Netflix's real value is in the content. Like there's
Mhm.
no it's the content. And so localization is really key to what they do. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you learned um, about going through that program and seeing that again very unique way of doing localization.
Netflix is where you learn how to brace for scale, right?
Right. Hmm.
and they're pushing the industry in a way that's so important because the industry can't scale to meet their needs for the future, right? And so
Yeah,
that's why you'll see them building some of their own tools, and that's why we did those types of things, because you
they
look at the
tried to
industry and
build
it's
a freelancer community and an LSP
Mhm.
basically themselves at one
Yeah.
point.
Yep. So and that's like, I'll say that Netflix is one of those other places where it's okay to try things and to have them
Mm-hmm.
not be successful in the end, and that's something I've carried with me as well, right? It's this fail forward fast mentality,
Mm-hmm.
um, where you just allow for this rapid experimentation, and that's really valuable, and I think it leads to developments that we might not have otherwise had or might have 5 6 years down the road that we just can't wait for. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm super grateful for what I learned there in terms of bracing for scale, and I think it's made me more disruptive, purposefully disruptive is what I say, in how I walk into a company and how I interact with what some people would call vendors and I call partners instead, and saying like I don't think the industry works in a way that's super efficient. I don't think the industry works in a way that supports translators. Like, let's talk about that. Like, how can we make this better for everyone all around? And
That's
just
right.
never accepting the status quo is what I learned at Netflix, and we don't do that at Snap now either. So.
Well, let's get into talking about Snap, which is also an extraordinary company,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe tell us just a little bit about your team right now, where localization is situated in the organizational structure, and sort of one thing localization people sometimes say is like the people I report to don't know anything about what I and we do, which sort of seems like, well, part of your job is managing up and like letting them know what you do. So maybe tell us a little bit about the organizational structure and that dynamic.
Sure. So we're in the engineering organization.
Oh, really?
And yeah, we are. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think localization teams can be in like international markets, somewhere with QA, or in
Mm-hmm.
the international or in the engineering organization. That's where I've usually seen them, or in product, sometimes in product.
Or it
Right
can
now
be
we're
in
in the
all of
engineering.
those places and you have multiple copies of it
It's
everywhere.
true.
Right?
That's true, right? So
Yeah.
it's like what's that called? It's a dotted line
Yeah.
situation versus
Right.
like a singular entity. And so what we're doing right now is we're there because those are the types of resources we need inside of our team. So our team is very small internally. We have just 5 people, and
Mm-hmm.
externally we have over 1,200. And that includes our testers and our translators, of course, right? And so that is because companies like mine are always going to be constrained around headcount,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's how it works for corporations. And so what we've opted to do is move a lot of the execution work externally and keep the strategic work internally. So alignment work, picking and selecting tools, anything that could be centrally focused, we've kept that inside of our team that allows us to keep our headcount small. The folks that are currently inside of our team are rock stars in localization production. Essentially, these are the folks that can walk into a room and communicate with all the producers or engineers or whoever's building the product team, and identify any of the potholes that we might run into down the road, and then figure out how to bridge that gap. And they're great at that. So I have about 5 of those folks. And I think as the industry evolves, and I know as Snap evolves,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that's what I always tell them. This is like a career advancement thing: is you have to get more technical now. I think for a long time it was okay to be a project manager in the industry, and this is not a popular opinion. Not everyone likes to hear this, but you could be a project manager in the industry, and you still will be able to, right, on the vendor side. But when it comes to being on the buyer side or inside a corporation like Snap, you have to be more technical, and so much of that is connected to coding. And
That's
so
right.
that's where we are right now, is looking for that type of support, which is why we're in the engineering team right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's the scale part, and then there's just the trend, which accelerated by COVID. I would think is every company is becoming a software company, and every company is taking its sort of, I hate to use a 20-year-old term, but digital transformation, and its digital presence is becoming a lot bigger part of its business, which seems like an opportunity for us in localization, not just to like translate words, but to be a critical part of the customer and the product experience.
Oh yeah. And I think as machine translation and machine learning improves, it's just going to it's going to be a call to action for the rest of us to just step up in terms of our technical skills, so that we can understand, even just understand what folks are talking about when they're implementing a machine translation for solution, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right. Snap is pretty widely recognized as sort of a strong product company, and Evan in particular is kind of a product visionary. So these things like stories and lenses and that you might see in other social media companies' products actually originated at Snap. So maybe tell us a little bit about the product development lifecycle, and where localization, where the international customer and global customer experience fits into the product lifecycle, especially as you're in engineering.
Yeah. I think when I first joined, like I mentioned, localization was very at the end, very placed at the tail end of the process,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we knew that was an issue, right? When I took over, like when I went in, I was like, this won't work forever to build a global product. And we knew that eventually, international markets were going to become really important to Snap as we grew. And so we said, well, in order to build a truly globally resonant product, we have to climb further upstream. So we have evolved from localization and localization QA being executed at the end of the process, and we've moved more towards that upstream incorporation where we're looking at products earlier, advising on what may or may not work in different regions. And so that's kind of where we are right now. I'm in a super lucky position where I work with folks who are extremely passionate about bringing their products to as many people as possible. And I think that's one of the things that's like a trick up a localization manager's sleeve that everyone should have, is that you have to talk to product owners in the terms that they care about, and they care about impact. Right.
Right. That's
And
right.
so, yeah, right. And so
Yeah.
you can make this the way you think it should be made through your particular lens, which for us would be a North American, like US specific, even LA specific lens most of the time. Or I can help you make this in a way that will work for a global audience, and your impact is exponential. And so that's really attractive to them, right? So that's kind of like a managing sideways secret trick. And then you mentioned earlier about, working upward or managing upward, and lots of localization managers have managers that don't know what they do. I am lucky that that is not the situation. I work for some super geniuses who totally understand what we're doing. And I'm very lucky in that regard. But once you get past that point where you've educated the person above you, it's crucial, since if you're flying at 30,000 feet, they're flying at 50, it's crucial for you to recruit them as a partner in unlocking those opportunities for your team to swim upstream. Because there might be meetings you don't know about, that you don't have visibility into. There's going to be opportunities they're going to see from a more strategic level that you're not going to see just because of the meetings they're included on, the email distribution lists they're on, the partnerships they may have across the organization at these higher levels. So,
yeah, I think something you said earlier is quite important, which is speaking their language, which our language in localization is commonly, linguistic error rate, price per word, things like that. Whereas product people are talking about click-through rates and sign-ups and retention and churn and all that kind of stuff. So are you able to sort of translate the two, translate for lack of a better term, to be able to, sort of speak in terms of impact, I guess is the way that you phrased it.
I typically don't bring too much of our detailed
our sausage making.
I try to make sure that I'm coming to them on their terms. I've had greater success that way.
Right.
Some folks will ask, how much is this going to cost? Or how many users are in that region? They'll ask those more detailed questions, and we're always ready with those answers when they ask those questions. But I really try to stay on their own field. I've had the best success when we stick with using their terms and what they want, what they're looking for, what their goals are. So.
Yeah, what their OKRs or KPIs are, right?
You got it.
Well, let's talk about your team then. I think 2020, now 2021 has presented leaders with real challenges with leading teams. So tell us, how's your team doing? How are you doing? And what have you kind of learned through this debacle that we've all been through?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, in localization, we had a shortcut to making this transition. We've been working on globally dispersed teams for the 25, 30 years the industry has been around, or however long. Right?
That's right.
And so when folks were panicking inside of our company, like, how do we do this? We were kind of like, hey man, just make sure you have a distribution list, and don't you have a weekly stand-up that's on Hangout? You're good, no worries, right? So we actually gave out a lot of advice on how to make the transition to folks. I'll tell you that I think the biggest thing, the localization industry, the hardest thing for us was that the localization industry attracts a lot of empaths, right? Where people who generally are really interested in other people and other cultures, and not being able to see people on a regular basis. That's what hit my team the hardest.
Yeah, right.
I think one of my beautiful folks said to me the other day, she's like, I just need people. I was like, I totally understand, right? So while we were able to, our tools and our setups and our processes were able to rapidly overcome the fact that we were not all in the same place, our emotional well-being is the thing that's really, really been impacted.
Yeah, the remote work is one part of it. When you couple that with the social isolation generally from everything, that seems to have really intensified the situation. Even though I think the industry is sort of set up in it's just sort of ingrained that it's a distributed and remote sort of supply chain, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about innovation. So I think that you've been at some innovative companies. Typically, when we talk about innovation, it's like in terms of technology, and then like, unfortunately, it just reduces down to machine translation or something. But that overlooks innovations in processes, in other types of tools, in the way that we train and develop people, in the roles in the organizations. So what are the couple of innovations that you've seen in the last, I don't know, take 2 to 3 years that you've been excited about and that you've actually implemented with your team?
That's good. I think a lot of what I'm excited about is in the tool set and not necessarily specific to like machine translation, but
Mm-hmm.
the way tools bridge gaps between the different parts of what we need to do, right? Between LQA, between upstream integration. Um, for example, in design tools right now, we're looking at tools that can do modeling or plugins that can do modeling for
Mm-hmm.
designers as they're building products out. So we're talking about moving further upstream than companies are usually letting us. Um, and so we spend a lot of time in that space right now. I'm excited about implementing some of those things. So it could be right to left modeling. It could be the implementation of pseudo localization. It could be machine translation just to see what your designs can look like in French, things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
when it comes down to tools, we're seeing some of that. One of the things I'm dying for that I haven't seen yet, but I'm always looking for, is a platform that will allow me to implement my text and then see it in the app right away. And we're getting close. Because I want my translators to see what it's going to look like as they're translating, right? To
Right.
solve bugs ahead of time. And so I'm really excited about those types of improvements because those are the ones that we most need in my mobile space right
In the
now.
mobile part, right?
Yeah, we don't spend too much time right now delving into like machine translation concepts because I mean our industry always says, well, that's 10 years out, right? And so we're looking at those other optimizations we can make faster, either in ourselves, right? Like, okay, I better learn some technical skills, or in the processes, like I mentioned earlier. So those are some of the things I'm spending a lot of time on. And then when it comes to the folks that I manage, and innovation of self,
Innovation of
we are
self, right?
spent
I like that.
innovation of self. Yeah, we are spending more time understanding what the organizations will require of us in the future as we evolve from this tactical execution team to this more in-house consultation, um, like broader consultation entity, if you will. And so maybe we go to conferences, maybe we're sending some folks to some classes. But I think that's a really important part for us to call out. Trying to think if there's anything else that I've implemented that I wouldn't be giving away the secret to the sauce in any particular company I've worked for. But I think, okay, innovation and partnerships. We should talk about that. This is something you and I talk about a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a lot of the people in my industry and my position, like, hire a vendor and then just send it to them and yell at them when it's late, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's not okay with me.
It's like the dry cleaner or something like that. Why'd you mess up my jacket?
It's not okay to even yell at the dry cleaner.
Yeah, right.
But
It's
anyway,
contrary to the kind value, that's for sure.
so you just don't get the best work out of people when you aren't kind to them and when
Mm-hmm.
you treat them like a vendor, right? And so I don't hire vendors, I hire partners, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I wouldn't even call it hiring partners. We look for partners and see if they're agreeable to partnering with us, right? And that could be a translation entity, that could be an LQA entity, that could be an internationalization engineering entity, could be a tooling entity, right? I don't have any yell at my tooling vendors. But I hear from so many of the folks that I work with on the seller side, if you will, that some of our buyers are not kind to them. And
Mm-hmm.
that is something I want to push for innovation in in our industry, as I want that to change desperately. Like, I really want us to understand that the people that actually do the tactical work for us, um, they're the reason that we're able to be successful. And so there's no other way to treat them than as partners. You have to treat them as partners. So.
Yeah, and I think that, you mentioned earlier, you have 5 full-time employees. I mean, I have this huge company, public company, all these 200 million users or whatever it is. You have 5 localization people and 1,200 people behind them that are making this possible. So that's like actually a pretty large group of people that you're managing. And I think one thing that's sort of overlooked sometimes is this companies spend all this time on employee experience and training employees and making their situation really great. And then you have all these other people who are critical to this business function, and you do the opposite of that for them. And like, you expect an interesting and good result that seems a little bit counterintuitive. And I think this goes down to the translators too, which, without, sort of them, we can't really do our job, because we need high quality, output. And that the fact that they're called vendors is sort of indicative of the sort of problem that you're talking about.
Yep. So let's call it innovation of mindset. That's what
I like that.
Yeah. Everyone else you're going to talk to is going to dig into like the technical improvements they're excited about, right? Mm-hmm. But I just think that we overlook some of these other spaces, and we shouldn't. They're important too.
I agree with that. Well, let me ask you the last question, which is, you at these companies, especially Snap and Netflix are 2 good examples of companies that are constantly innovating, and like, change is de rigueur. It's like, unless you're changing and inventing new things, you're kind of dying. Localization tends to kind of be the opposite. Like, we get one thing working and we just keep doing it that way so that nothing breaks. So how do you kind of set up your team and coach them and create a culture where there is that fail fast mindset that you mentioned?
That's a great question. So whenever I take over a team first, take over sounds authoritarian. Whenever I get to partner with a new team.
You said you were always in charge on the playground, so maybe.
It's still in there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whenever I get to partner with a new team, meet some new folks, the first thing I have to do is learn, what they've built. And then the second thing that I have to do is talk them out of protecting all of it because they don't want to change it, because it is comfortable and it is working, right? And so maybe if there are some ideas that I have that would bring it to like the next level in terms of being able to scale or set them free from doing terrible things they shouldn't be doing manually, it takes some work. Some time with my team right now talking through like what can we do next by opening up for just like extremely frank feedback. And we're doing that internally inside of our own team. We do that with our partners, and we do that with our partners internally to the company as well. So in most of my calls with my vendors, for lack of a better word, we say, is there anything we can do? Anything you want us to start doing, stop doing, anything we can do differently or better, right? And so I don't know how many buyers ask that of their sellers, right? But you have to be willing to do that, and you have to make it known that it's okay to have those folks give you that frank feedback. Doing this is killing us and slowing us down, right? And so sometimes the innovation doesn't always come from my team. A lot of times it does. Sometimes it will come from my vendors, and sometimes it will come from my partners inside the organization by just asking those simple questions like, anything you want me to do more of, less of, or better? That's another way we frame it. And then we also use this really great framework where we sit in a room after we've finished a big project, right? This is the best time, like it's an inflection point. And we do what's called a keep, stop, start session. And we shop for feedback that way too, right? And like, okay, everybody just start hollering in a Google Jamboard, because it's 2020, 2021, right?
You gotta have the remote whiteboard, yeah.
So good, right?
Yeah.
Let's just start talking about what needs to change. And that's where we get some of our best ideas, and you have to be open for that. And it's a mindset shift for many people in localization, because they have been doing it one way for so long. I also have a t-shirt. I'm famous for a t-shirt. It says, if you're doing it in a spreadsheet, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Sometimes I wear that to meetings,
Yeah.
and then someone will notice, and I'm like, "Yes, I am wearing that. It's funny, right?" So, sometimes I break down those walls with humor because I think you have
Mhm.
to. But yes, I am. I do have that T-shirt, so that helps too.
Okay, well, I think we can leave it with that. If you're doing it in a spreadsheet, you're doing it wrong. That's the key takeaway. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for doing this fun conversation. Thanks for sharing your experience with everyone and with me. And thanks for the partnership and for the work that you do.
Grateful for you. Thank you, sir. Take care.
All right, thanks.